What is up, everybody? Welcome back to Life in the Cosmos with me, Riley Adair. Today, we are going to be going through predictions that I have for you from what's been happening and changing in your life since 2023, April of 2023 to be exact, and what changes are going to continue to take place until 2027. So, if you want to know more about what's coming up for you, listen to this episode. The day that I am filming this, it is March 25th, 2025, and we are just in the lead up to a total solar eclipse in Aries. A solar eclipse is when the moon passes between the sun and the earth, and it causes an obstruction of light. So if you've ever been in the vicinity of an eclipse, you'll know that the world goes completely dark for a few minutes, and it almost everything kind of seems to go quiet. At least that was my experience when I saw the eclipse last year. It was very eerie and it feels a little otherworldly. And I don't know, it just there's like something in the air. It feels like something's really happening. Just as some background, a lunar eclipse is when the earth passes between the sun and the moon goes darker and almost takes on a red color. In astrology, eclipses signify major endings and major beginnings. Eclipses can show crazy turns of fate, things that are completely outside of your control, and things that set you on the trajectory to a different path. Where and what part of your life is going to change is all based on where in your chart you have the eclipse happening in. So, for example, since 2023, we've had eclipses going back and forth between the Aries and Libra houses of our charts. So, whatever part of your chart is ruled by Aries and Libra, it shows what kind of changes you're going to be experiencing. So, for example, if you're a Cancer rising, Libra rules the fourth house of home, family, living situation, and parents. And Aries rules the 10th house of career, worldly aspirations. Also, parents can be in the 10th house as well. And it can also show changes to your public status. So, getting married, having a baby. So, since 2023, Cancer risings may have noticed that they've been actively like looking for a home or they've had changes to their home. They've even maybe had renovations or moved somewhere or had something going on with their parents. And then in either parallel or like in conjunction to also things happening with their career and their public persona, and they may be getting seen more if that's something that they're like they may reach some level of career heights or have major shakeups and change-ups in the place of their career. So if you're new to astrology and you don't know what the frick I'm talking about, what I want you to do is go to www.astroseek.com. Look for birth chart. It should be the first one that comes up. And you're going to type in your birth info, your date of birth, where you were born, and your time. I know that not everyone has the blessing of like knowing their birth time. There is ways to rectify this. I can't tell you all about it right now, but a birth time, an accurate birth time significantly changes things because it is through the accurate birth time that we're able to see, it kind of sets the stage for the rest of your chart. And that's how we're able to predict things that are going to happen. So I just encourage you to just try to find the most accurate birth time that you can. And I use whole sign houses. That is an important distinction. Most astrology softwares will go straight to Placidus. I use whole sign, so if you want to adjust to what I use, just go to the settings on AstroSeek. You'll see it. Type in, it'll say sign system, and just hit whole signs. Let's talk more about an eclipse. Like, what is it? What does it do? Give me some examples. So, the effects of an eclipse can be felt up to 6 months after. So we've had, like I said, Aries and Libra eclipses since 2023. On March 29th, we're going to have the last eclipse in Aries, kind of wrapping up this whole cycle for us. And so we'll be kind of feeling the effects of the eclipse until about September of 2025. So the energy around an eclipse can often feel chaotic depending on what planets it's aspecting in your chart. You can feel totally drained. I sleep like a motherfucker every time there's an eclipse. Like, oh my gosh, I like sleep so much. The energy can feel chaotic, you can feel drained, but also it's not a time for you to be, getting out and doing things and like launching things and, pushing for a bunch of stuff. It's almost like you're standing in the middle of a vortex and everything is happening around you, and you may have a lot of pivotal life events happening around an eclipse. So that's why I encourage everyone in the weeks leading up to and the weeks around, kind of just write down what happens to you, because you might be surprised that something that seems like rather innocuous or like it's not going to be important ends up being very important for you later on. So a perfect example of this would be around the first eclipse, you meet someone and you don't really think anything of it. Like it's, just another day. And around the second eclipse, that person ends up connecting you to an opportunity that you've actually been wanting for a really long time. And that opportunity ends up connecting you to someone else. And then you end up getting a career advancement or whatever it is that you're searching for. So it's things that happen that you may not at the time register as important, but then when you look back in retrospect at the larger picture of your life, you realize that something totally life-changing happened and you just didn't register it at the time. Another example of this would be around, the first eclipse. Maybe an idea floats into your head that you would like to write a book, but you don't think anything of it because you get lots of ideas. And then by the second eclipse, you've thought about this idea of writing a book more and more and more. And you decide, you know what, let me actually just write this book. And by the third eclipse, the book is done and you want to start sending it out to publishers. And let's say by the final eclipse, your book has been sent to publishers and maybe it got picked up by someone. So you wouldn't have thought anything really of it if that the first idea of just a book coming to you, but it ends up being the book that changes your life, that sets you on a new trajectory as a writer, things like that. So I'm gonna get into all the rising signs and what's been happening for you guys and what's coming up. But I think I have to start with my own story just to kind of give you an idea of the eclipses and how this can play out. So obviously we are still at the end, the tail end of the eclipses in the Aries and Libra part of your chart. And so as a Gemini rising, Libra rules my fifth house of creativity, sex, children, dating, any type of creative output. And Aries rules my 11th house of hopes, dreams, aspirations, networks, and social media. Since April of 2023, so much has happened connected to these areas of my life, some of them going hand in hand and other ones being totally separate. So let's start with the fifth house. My eclipse story is actually very similar to the example that I gave. When the eclipses started in the area in the Libra part of my chart, my fifth house, I did get an idea to write a book. I thought like I have all this poetry. I would love to like put it in a book maybe one day, and I didn't really think anything of it. And then as time went on, I ended up actually like writing the first draft of that book, and I'm still sitting on it. I hope that eventually it will be published, probably in the eclipses in my fourth and 10th house. But I put a lot of time and effort into like actually creating that creating that book and creating that piece of art, because the fifth house rules like art and creativity. So it really connects you to those centers in your life. In terms of like sexuality and dating, I kind of became like radicalized in dating in the sense that I stopped dating anyone. I, for a long time, wasn't really interested. And then I ended up accepting my queerness more, and because the fifth house rules sexuality as well. So I feel like I ended up accepting my own sexuality way more than I ever have. I feel like I always kind of like hid it away a little bit. So I feel like these eclipses and with Lilith moving through my fifth house of Libra, I ended up like accepting that whole part of my life so much more. In terms of the 11th house of hopes, dreams, friends, networks, and social media, when these eclipses started, I didn't have any social media. I went through a phase a few years ago where I deleted all my social media accounts. I did not want to be perceived. But then I started to want to do this whole astrology thing, and I started making astrology TikToks and just doing it for fun. I was like stoned like half the time. But and then it just turned into this whole thing of like, okay, now I ended up doing events and psychic fairs where I was connecting to large groups of people and going around and meeting everyone and connecting to like these like psychic and like spiritual groups. And then I ended up, creating this podcast. And this is like such an example of like putting myself out there and like really putting more time into my social media so that it can grow. So that's just an example of how those Aries and Libra eclipses, or how the Aries and Libra eclipses affected me. We will obviously still see there's still time, so I don't know how the end of this story is going to go for me, but we shall see. As a side note, if you are more familiar with astrology and if you want to get into a more advanced level of interpretation, I want to offer this to you at the beginning. The eclipses will affect the parts of your chart that are that the eclipses are happening in, so Aries and Libra. But it's also going to impact any houses in your chart that are ruled by Venus and by Mars, because Venus rules Libra and it rules Taurus. So, as a Gemini rising, it rules my fifth house of creativity and my 12th house of loneliness and isolation. So, when I actually wrote that book, I was in a period where I was incredibly isolated and like really like kind of going inward, and spent a good like 6 months just basically rarely leaving the house. And Mars also rules my sixth house of work. So all of these things that I'm talking about are all very much related to my sixth house of everyday work. So for you, if you would like to know what other areas of your life are going to be affected, look to what houses Venus rules and Mars rules. So Mars rules Aries and Scorpio, Venus rules Libra and Taurus. If you want to take it even one step further, look at the planets that are in those signs. So if you have your sun in Libra, that the sun often represents like our life's work. So impacting your work life and your consciousness. If you have your moon in Libra, this could impact again your home because the moon's associated with home, your body because the moon grounds things into reality and brings things into the physical realm. Those are just some little tips if you want to take things a little bit further, but no worries. We can also just start with the basics. So scroll down, find your rising sign, and hear what's going to be happening for you in the next little while. If you are an Aries or Libra rising since 2023, the eclipses have been going between your first house of self and your seventh house of partnerships and marriage. In ancient astrology, the first house is called the helm because it is the ship that steers your life. It is the only part of the chart that actually represents you and your identity. When you have eclipses happening in your first house, you may make an entire pivotal shift in who you are, how you present yourself, your body, and your overall direction in your life. The first house is said to represent your physical constitution, so your actual body and your physical appearance. So if you got plastic surgery, that would be a first house thing. If you totally changed up your hair, changed up your look, changed up how you are approaching life as a whole, and how you identify yourself in the world and how others identify you. That is all ruled by the first house. The first house is called the foundation, and the beginning. So I feel like when there's eclipses happening in your first house, these can set the foundation for you to have a totally new beginning in an area of your life. And so these are when you see total reroutes and total pivots. So if you're an Aries or Libra rising, these eclipses have been going from your first house to your seventh house. So you have all of this stuff happening with your identity and your body and who you are. And then at the same time, you're also being asked to evaluate who are you in relationship with. The seventh house is all about relationships. Friends that are your best friends, those one-on-one, extremely close interactions. The seventh house represents other. It represents marriage, union, partnership. It can represent any of those one-on-one interactions, like I said. When eclipses are happening between the first and the seventh house, you may be going through a period where you're trying to figure out who you are and who you are in relationship to other people. What are the changes that are happening in your identity, and how do those changes end up affecting the most important relationships in your life? My brother is an Aries rising, and in the last few years, he's developed like a very serious relationship. He got engaged, and in May, he's going to be getting married. So that's a very classic example of eclipses going between your first house of self and your seventh house of marriage and union. Like he's literally getting married. I've heard of other people with the eclipses going between their first and the seventh. There was someone who recognized that they were non-binary. They came out as non-binary, and then they had to kind of like figure that out with their partner that they were with and how that changed how they showed up in the relationship, how that changed the relationship as a whole. These eclipses could also be the time when you actually break up with a partner that's no longer serving you. And through that experience, you end up finding out who you are all over again and stepping onto a new path and building your foundation like much stronger than it was before. So it's anything that affects your significant one-on-one relationships and your sense of self and your overall life direction. In ancient astrology, the seventh house was also called the house of enemies. In modern days, that's more the 12th house. And that sounds kind of archaic to say, like the house of enemies, but there are certain situations in which that can really show up. So if that's shown up for you, comment below. I'd love to hear because that's so interesting. Since September of 2024 until April of 2027, the eclipses have slowly started transitioning to Pisces and Virgo. For Aries and Libra people, this affects your sixth house of health and well-being and your 12th house of loneliness and isolation. So let's get into it. So the sixth house can represent the physical body. It represents sickness, suffering, people that are below you in terms of rank. In ancient astrology, that was like slaves, and modern day life, that's like someone who works for you, someone that you employ. It can also represent, it says in ancient astrology, quadrupeds. So that's just four-legged animals, your pets. So the sixth house in ancient astrology is considered one of the bad houses. So I'm going to give you the worst of the worst here, and we're going to work our way away from that very bad spectrum, but I have to show you the worst of the worst at the beginning. So the sixth house represents illness, the physical body. It can represent being like crippled, wasting away, dissipation of something, loss. So that's on the very far end of the spectrum. It can also represent travel, but like a type of travel where you're being like banished and exiled. So that's a very far end of the spectrum. It's not always going to be bad though. In modern day astrology, the sixth house is kind of toned down a little bit. It represents health, your everyday work, the work that you show up to day in and day out. It represents your routines, any type of health practices. So when people have eclipses happening between the sixth and 12th house, specifically the sixth house, you may end up having an illness come about. You may end up having like getting sick, to be honest. It happened to me in my sixth and 12th house. I got pretty sick. I ended up being fine though. Um, or if it's not that bad, you may end up getting so much more focused on your health and what are your wellness routines that you enact every single day? And are they working for you or do you want to change them? Do you want to exercise more? People with eclipses in their sixth house, I have a friend who was just going through this and she got super into fitness. She ended up working out every day. She even thought about being like a Pilates instructor. She even went sober for a couple months. Like she really zoomed in on the areas of her health and well-being. The sixth house also represents four-legged friends, so you may end up getting a closer connection to animals. You may end up, getting an animal or fostering an animal or just for whatever reason being very close to animals. This actually happened for me as well. I ended up being a dog walker because I was sick and I needed to get out and do some exercise. So I ended up taking care of some dogs, and that was honestly amazing. Highly recommend. The 12th house is the house of enemies, hospitals, isolation, loneliness, and loss. It is called the place of bad spirit in ancient astrology. In ancient astrology, the 12th house rules hospitals, prisons, anything where you're forced into a kind of seclusion and where you may be kind of on the fringe of society in some ways. So, the 12th house eclipses can find that you may have enemies coming out of the woodwork. I know that sounds like such a strong word because it is a strong word, and that is on the farthest end of the spectrum. But sometimes that does happen in life. Like you will have people working against you at some time. So that is something that can happen. It could also be that you end up taking a period where, for whatever reason, you're either forced into a level of isolation or you choose it. So, a great example of this would be going away into the cabins or going away into the woods to write a book because you need that isolation and that time alone to really focus on your creative output. Galileo wrote his best works when he was in prison, and he has a bunch of planets in the 12th house, which is so funny, like connecting the themes of imprisonment with the 12th house. In my own personal experience and more in modern day astrology, the 12th house is what precedes the first. So the 12th house can represent a wrapping up of things. It's like where you're kind of going through the final stages of a cycle. For example, if you've been grieving and healing from something, the 12th house can be where you really come to terms with that grief. You come to a level of acceptance, and there from that place of not running from it and just being a part of it and allowing it to move through you. And it being the 12th house comes at the end of a long journey and a long road. And the 12th house is where you really wash your hands of it and you let it go. And that's why it's associated with loss. And loss can be negative, loss can be something that's like wrenched from you, but loss can also be I'm choosing to let this area of my life fall to rest. I'm choosing to let this go now. And that I think is just such a beautiful thing. I think sometimes we don't value that period enough where you're in the final stages of your healing and you're really putting some things to rest. There's something very sad and there's something very beautiful about the 12th house. It's a place of bad spirit as opposed to the sixth house, which is the place of bad fortune, because the sixth house represents our physical health and our physical body. The 12th house represents our mental body, so our mental well-being, our emotions, our internal world. It is a place of self undoing. So if you have habits that are like actively working against you, addictions, anything like that, you may end up being confronted with that in your 12th house eclipses. I know that a lot of people with the axis of the 6th and 12th house eclipses, they end up becoming sober because they realize that they were leaning too heavily on these substances. So they take a break and they totally change their framework around using substances. In my experience of having 6th and 12th house eclipses, I ended up getting really sick for a period of time and ended up just like living in my house, couldn't go to work, and was very isolated. And I think looking back, that was such a positive experience in the end. I needed to slow down and rest, and it taught me a lot about like burnout. And simultaneously, I ended up letting go of something that I had been holding on to for a long, long time. And I kind of did my final act of laying it to rest and moving forward. So I feel like if I hadn't have had those 6th and 12th house eclipses, I just don't think I would be, if I hadn't have gone through those things and let go in the way that I did and had those experiences, I think I would be so much more unhappy now. So, as tough as some of those things were, I'm grateful for it now. So, I don't want to scare you. Things like it's astrology can, especially ancient astrology, can sound so black or white and so scary, but it's not. It can be, there's a million ways that things can play out. And there can be, it all depends on planets in your chart and transits, but there can be another example of 6th and 12th house eclipses is someone who ends up having major changes in their career. The 6th house does represent work. And through that, they end up entering a new life stage. Like, for example, I have a friend who has eclipses in her 6th and 12th house, and she became more focused on exercising and working out and doing things that were positive for her body. And at the same time, she ended up reaching major advancements in her career. She ended up getting a new position, reaching a place of higher authority. She had someone working for her for the first time ever. So the sixth house does represent people that you employ. The 12th house to me always seems like you're saying goodbye to an old life and ushering in a new one. If you are a Taurus or Scorpio rising, since April of 2023, you've had eclipses going between your sixth house of work and your 12th house of loneliness, isolation, and loss. So, the sixth house is in ancient astrology, it is considered the place of bad fortune. Just a warning, I'm going to show you the farthest end of the spectrum, the worst of the worst. And I just want to say that things are not always the worst. They're always on a sliding scale, but I need to make you know about both ends of the scale so that you can really see where things align with you. So the sixth house is called the place of bad fortune, and it concerns everything to do with your body and your health. So if you've had eclipses going through your sixth house, you may have had some lingering health problems. Maybe you were sick for a while. Maybe you received a diagnosis, or you've just had kind of like stuff happening health wise that you may not fully understand. In ancient astrology, the sixth house is considered the house of illness and suffering. And so it's anything that affects your physical. In ancient astrology, the sixth house also rules slaves. So in a modern day context, this would be anyone who is employed for you, anyone who works underneath you. The sixth house also rules four-footed animals, quadrupeds, just like pets in general. In more modern times and in a lighter fashion, the sixth house rules your everyday work, the work that you show up to day in and day out. It rules like your health routines, because it rules your physical body, it rules everything that you do to take care of that body. Do you work out every day? Do you eat well? Do you sleep well? How do you take care of yourself? And because it rules your house of work, it's eclipses in your sixth house are you may end up seeing career advancements or changes in your work or changes to your health routines. I have a friend who's had eclipses going between her sixth and 12th house because she's a Scorpio rising. And she's had a bunch of odd like health problems, but at the same time she's also become so much more invested in the gym. She's thought about becoming a Pilates instructor. So she's really taken this time to reinvest so much more into her own health practices. 12th house is called the place of bad spirit in ancient astrology. So if the sixth house represents the body, the 12th house represents the spirit and like the mental body. So this would rule like your mental health, your mental well-being. The 12th house also rules enemies, places of isolation, hospitals, loss, prisons, any place where people are isolated or on the fringes of society. So, to give you an example, when I had eclipses going through my sixth and my 12th house, I ended up getting very sick. My body is in the sixth house, and I ended up becoming extremely isolated because I was just in my house by myself for months. The 12th house represents periods of isolation, periods of loneliness, periods where you're spending more time in hospitals and in prisons. I know someone who has had these eclipses happening between their sixth and their 12th house, and they've actually ended up volunteering in hospitals and volunteering in homes for adults with special needs and spending a lot of time in places where people are usually sequestered and kind of like not necessarily interacting with the rest of the world. So that's why hospitals are here and prisons. The 12th house can also represent self-undoing. So it's any behaviors that you have that are counterproductive to what you desire. So, do you have addictions? Are there any addictions that are holding yourself back? And I notice that people who have eclipses between their sixth and 12th house, they may go through a period of sobriety where they are really focused on getting their mind clear and releasing their addictions. And so that would be a positive manifestation of the eclipses in the sixth and 12th house. A negative manifestation of that would be actively leaning on those self-undoing behaviors like substance use, and then in turn that affecting your physical body. The 12th house is really interesting because as much as it's called the place of bad spirit and a place of isolation, in my personal experience, it's the place that, well, the 12th precedes the first house. So the 12th house is a kind of a wrapping up, an ending of a cycle before you embark into a new way of life and into a new journey. So for me, the 12th house often shows things that are your wrapping something up and letting it go because the 12th house is a place of loss. That loss can be sometimes positive because it's like if you've been grieving something and moving through something that's been really heavy and on your heart and hurting you a lot, the 12th house is where you've gone through that whole entire process. And in the 12th house, that's where you let it go. That's where you have your final goodbye. That's where you know, have the funeral and the ceremony or the memorial ceremony, and you really let that person or that place or that piece of your heart kind of to you lay it to rest. And that gives you the ground to start something new whenever you have eclipses going through your first house. So it can represent loss. I do know someone who's had these eclipses and their husband died. And but it doesn't always have to represent like the like a terrible type of loss. It can represent something where it's time for you to let this go. And you finally had the courage to do it, and you finally had the ability to let it go. So those eclipses between your 6th and 12th house have been happening since April of 2023, and you'll be experiencing changes in those areas of your life until roughly like September of 2025. September of 2024, we started a new eclipse cycle that will be going until April of 2027. So, for you, my Taurus and Scorpio risings, this is going between your 5th house of creativity, pleasure, sex, children, and your 11th house of hopes, aspirations, broader communities, and networks. So you've let something go, something has transformed in these 6th and 12th house eclipses. And now we can open up to something a little bit more positive, and I love this for you. So to start, the 5th house is called the place of good fortune. We love that. We love the good fortune. The 5th house represents any type of creative output. That could be your art, that could be your sense of style, your fashion sense, whatever way that you find and express your creativity. For some people, this is through being an entrepreneur and having businesses. For other people, this is through creating visual pieces of art. For some people, this could be writing poetry. The 5th house and its connection to children is the idea of like giving birth to something. So the 5th, for people with their 5th house eclipses, they may actually literally give birth and have a child, or there may be changes in the lives of their children. In ancient astrology, your chart doesn't just represent you, it represents all the other people in your life. So if you're a parent and you have eclipses going through your 5th house, your child may reach a major milestone, or for whatever reason, you're more involved in the life of your child, or something major is happening for your kid. The 5th house also rules sex and dating. It's always like it's the fun type of courtship. It's like the romantic flirtation. It is just starting to see someone new and getting a little bit excited about it. So when you have eclipses going through your 5th house, you may have it changed in your dating life? If you haven't been dating anyone and you've been very closed off, maybe during these eclipses, you will open up to dating and you will open up to meeting new people and to experiencing that kind of like lighthearted pleasure and joy. If you are a serial dater, maybe the changes that the 5th house will bring, well, you'll be like, girl, I need to stop dating for a while. I need to figure myself out or stop accepting breadcrumbs and totally reel back that whole part of your life and reevaluate and reorganize and re-find out what is right for you. The 5th house, because it covers sexuality, it could also be reacquainting yourself with your sexuality. Like, this is a time when a lot of people may come out as queer or non-binary or they're polyamorous. It's a time where you're embracing your sexuality more, or if you have malefics in that house, maybe you're completely denying your sexuality, and that's an experience that you're coming up against. The fifth house represents games and anything that you do for pleasure, anything that you do for fun. So, pro athletes will often have fifth house placements, or because they're literally make a life out of a game that they love. So, you may end up reconnecting to a sport that you once loved or an activity that you once loved as a kid, but for whatever reason, you've forgotten it. So the fifth house is all about reconnecting you to your authentic idea of fun and what gives you that lighthearted, creative place to thrive. In ancient astrology, the fifth house is called the place of good fortune. So you may notice an increase in your fortune. You may notice that you have events that end up working out really well for you. This is a place of, yeah, just like love and creativity. Now, I will give you a warning. The fifth house, because it is the place of, it can be the place of hedonists in a way. Like the fifth house invites you to have a good time, to enjoy letting loose and having fun a little bit. But depending on the sign that's on your fifth house, like if you could have fun a little, you can have a little bit too much fun. So do watch out for overindulgence. That could be something that happens. But otherwise, I hope you open up to your creativity and to this spark that's inside of you and whatever kind of makes you feel alive, because that's always what I think of when I think of the fifth house. The 11th house is called the place of good spirit. It represents our hopes, our dreams, our aspirations, our friends, and broad networks and communities of people. So when you have eclipses happening between your fifth and 11th house, in the 11th house, your dreams and goals for the future may be highlighted. You might have a spotlight on everything that you want to come into fruition in your life. So, pursuing those goals, pursuing those dreams may become to be at the forefront of your life and of your focus and of your drive. The 11th house represents friends. So, you could have, things could be happening in the lives of your friends. Like I said, the astrology chart in ancient astrology, it represents all the people in your life. So maybe your friends end up having a baby. Maybe your friends end up getting married. Maybe your friends end up having a major life milestone that somehow affects you, or like a friend moves in with you, or something to do with your friends. The 11th house also represents broader networks of people and communities. So, a running club would be a perfect example of this. A traveling circus would be a perfect example of an 11th house community. When I had eclipses happening between my fifth and 11th house, I ended up becoming a part of a psychic fair and traveling with those people. And just it's like a very large and concentrated community. So that's what I want you to think of when you think of the 11th house. The 11th house in this modern day and age also has a lot to do with social media, the internet. If you're on a Reddit group, this would be a perfect example of an 11th house community, because the 11th house represents any type of larger community and larger network of people. So in these times, we use social media a lot. So you may end up getting a greater social media presence. You may end up starting a YouTube channel. You may end up joining some kind of internet support group. Um, or you might totally delete your social media altogether, because the eclipses signify major endings and major beginnings. So there's a shakeup in this area of your life. The way that you've been doing something is not going to be the way that you're going to continue to do something. The 11th house also is what I consider to be like the house of networking. People who are really good at networking and who they have often have really strong 11th house placements. So you may feel a desire to connect to people within your community, people within your, um, you know, desired career field. You may go to a conference. So tell me, Taurus and Scorpio risings, have you noticed the themes of the sixth and 12th house of your physical body and isolation? Have you noticed those themes already? If you have, please comment below. And if you haven't, please comment below too. I want to hear it. I want to hear all the feedback. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to give you the broadest generalizations because everybody's lives are so different. The way that things are going to play out in people's lives, it's going to be so different from person to person. So if I give you the broadest interpretation, maybe then you'll be able to see how these things connect. But I'm really proud. I'm really happy to see that you guys are moving out of this more kind of heavier work focused energy of the sixth and 12th house to the fun and the creativity and the lightness of the fifth and the 11th. And I hope that your dreams, because the 11th house is the place of dreams, I hope they come true. I hope you're able to pursue those dreams and those desires that you want for yourself. And yeah, so let me know how it goes for you and good luck. Hello, my beautiful Gemini and Sagittarius risings. You guys have been having eclipses through your fifth and 11th house since April of 2023. So, since April of 2023 until this September, you may have noticed major endings and major beginnings in your fifth house of fun, creativity, children, joie de vivre, pleasure activities, and your 11th house of friends, hopes, dreams, aspirations, broader social networks, and communities, including internet communities. So let's get into it in a little bit more detail. The fifth house in ancient astrology is called the place of good fortune. It is a place where things tend to grow, success tends to accumulate. So, where you started is probably not going to be where you end in these eclipses. You may have noticed an increase in your fortune, whether that's a literal manifestation of like having more money, but I'm thinking more like a fortune in terms of like being able to connect to your creativity and fortune in terms of connecting to things that give you joy. The fifth house is the house of children. So your attention may have been focused on children, whether that's becoming pregnant, doing IVF or trying to get pregnant or, being pregnant and actually having a kid, or if you're already a parent, the fifth house represents your children. So you may have had major things happening in your children's lives. They may have had major developments, major milestones, and your focus may have just been more on them in the last few years. The fifth house represents creativity and our offspring. So for some people, this can be, your offspring can be your business ventures, the things that you bring into life. So for artists, this would be the book that they wrote, the painting that they did, the movie they filmed. It's connects you to your creativity and the things that you produce. You may have ended up writing a book or filming a movie or having some creative project. The fifth house also represents anything that we do for pleasure and anything that we do for fun. So, in the last couple of years, you may have noticed that you've reconnected to what once gave you joy and or found a new hobby that you're obsessed with, that you love, that gives you just so much excitement, whether that's crocheting, whether that's making garments or playing hockey or basketball, anything that you do for fun, anything that you do just to put a smile on your face, basically. The fifth house is also the place of hedonness. So you may have had to question your relationship to fun. Are you having too much or are you having none at all? Because both are important considerations because we definitely need to strike the middle way. The fifth house also rules dating, sex. It's the courtship phase. It's when nothing's so serious, but you're just, putting your toe in the water and dabbling in romance, right? So you may have had a major change in these areas. If you're someone that's like has always been a serial dater, serial relationshipper, you may have noticed that you may have taken a total break from dating and just been like, you know what, I need to figure out who I am and what I truly want. So I'm going to take a huge step back. If you're the opposite and you are someone who never dated before, you may have decided that, okay, I want to start dating. I want to start putting my foot in the pool. I want to start kind of seeing what's out there and exploring my options a little bit. The fifth house also rules sex and sexuality. So a lot of people with fifth house placements may end up coming out as queer or gay or polyamorous or straight or having like new sexual experiences and like really connecting to what sexual pleasure is for them and how they can connect that more. So I could totally see someone who got into Kundalini, they would have fifth house eclipses because that is such connecting to your like sexual center, if you will. So you've had all of this fifth house stuff going on, and in tandem, in parallel, or maybe like closely tied to, you've had things happening in your 11th house of friends, hopes, dreams, and broader social networks. So you may have been more actively pursuing your dreams and your desires and the things that you wish for, the things that you wish for when you lay your head down at night and you think about, I wouldn't it be amazing if I had this? So you may have spent more time actively pursuing those dreams and finding out ways to bring your desires into reality. The 11th house also rules friends. So maybe there's been something that's happening in the lives of your friends that you've needed to be there for, or you've needed to that's caused you to have some level of focus on that area of your life, on the area of your friends. The 11th house also rules social networks. So this could be any place where there's a broad community of people coming together. So in modern times, the internet is 100% here. Social media, Instagram, TikTok, Reddit forums, any place where people are gathering and you're being seen by people and you're seeing others and you're connecting with others over maybe like a shared interest. So for some people, this could be that maybe they've had eclipses signifying major endings and major beginnings in their 11th house, and they decide, you know what, I don't even want to be a part of social media anymore. This really isn't for me. Or people who've never had social media end up getting social media. I ended up getting social media when I've had these eclipses in my fifth and 11th house. They may be putting themselves out there more. People may end up joining a running club, joining a knitting group, a book club, anything where you're gathering with people with similar interests or like-minded, anything where you're really connecting to a community or to a broader group of people. It is the 11th house is called the place of good spirit. So there's a lot of joy here. In the fifth and 11th house eclipses, there's so much joy here. In September of 2024 until April of 2027, Gemini and Sagittarius rising signs are going to be having eclipses between their fourth house of home and family and their 10th house of career. So some of these things may have already started to notice some small inklings of change in these areas, but these will play out over the next few years and you'll see more of what this will mean for you. So I want to read from you from Chris Brennan's Hellenistic astrology book about the fourth house as the most hidden or private part of the chart. which is opposite to the most visible or public part of the chart associated with midheaven. The fourth also becomes associated with one's home, dwellings, household goods, and the house in which one is born. This is then extended to include things like one's city, property, lands, estates, fatherland, and nobility of birth. The fourth house is commonly associated with old age, the end of life, death, funerals, and things after death. It is also associated with religious or mystical matters, treasures, or sometimes confinement. So, the fourth house, because it is a place of home, it is the most private and intimate part of our lives. So, like Chris Brennan mentioned, it can show things that are private or hidden. The fourth house is called the subterranean place, and I think it's because it's at the basis of the chart. It sets the foundation for everything else. So the fourth house represents all the things that kind of came before you. So your parents, your grandparents, your ancestors, your lineage, the your homeland, your not just the home that you were born into and the family that you were born into, but the place that you're from. The fourth house has a strong connection to your parents. So when eclipses are happening in your fourth and 10th house, it can represent changes with your parents. It also represents the home that we're currently living in. So you may end up moving homes. You may decide to renovate your home. You may decide to buy a piece of land. The fourth house is associated with anything that's like subterranean. So if this was a house, the fourth house would be the basement. The fourth house represents things that are happening in privacy and in secrecy. So you may end up becoming more private about certain matters as time goes on with these eclipses. I find people with prominent fourth house placements, they often tend to kind of th keep things a little bit close to the chest. They don't want everyone to know their business because they are working on something and they have something going on internally that they don't necessarily want to be open to everyone else. So the fourth house also represents death. In like you're thinking old age, sometimes this would be an eclipse series where someone would die, but I'm not going to scare you because that's not necessarily going to happen. But it is associated with death. And I think it is because it is like the fourth house is associated with like mystical matters and things that are hidden. And I think, what's more hidden than death? You die, and it's almost like you step onto another side of a veil and people can't see you. So, in contrast, Gemini and Sagittarius risings are also, the eclipses are also hitting the 10th house. So the 10th house is the most public part of the chart. The 10th house represents your career, your public persona, how people in the public perceive you. So in this day and age, a lot of people, when they're introducing someone, they'll say, "This is Jerry and he's a doctor." Well, Jerry the doctor, who he is perceived as by the public, is a doctor. And so it's anything that changes how you're publicly perceived. So marriage would be placed here because you go from a single person to a married person. Becoming a parent would be placed here because you go from being just a single married person or single person and having a kid and and now you're a parent. So that changes your role in society. The 10th house is often also associated with the parent that was the primary caregiver. So for many people, that was their mom. For some people, that is their dad. It just depends on how your family is set up. So this could be changes happening with your relationship to your mom, um, changes happening with your mom. The fourth house is more commonly associated with fathers, but it does kind of encapsulate both parents in general. So there's a lot of having eclipses going through the fourth and 10th house. These can represent some very pivotal changes in your life because these are major parts of your life, where you live and where you lay your head to rest and your private sanctuary. Having major endings and major beginnings in this area can lead to major life changes, as well as to having major endings and major beginnings in the areas of your career. So It's an interesting contrast because the fourth house is so private and the 10th house is so public. So you may end up making major advancements in your career. If you have a public facing career, you could be getting more recognition than ever. You could be having people suddenly notice your work or follow you, or you go viral, or anything like that. You may end up placing yourself on a new trajectory of life. Other things that could happen is you may end up taking care of your parents. If your parents are aging and elderly, you may end up taking care of them. You may end up moving in with a parent. Um, you may end up buying land and becoming more focused on real estate because the fourth house is associated with land. You may end up moving in with someone and having someone new in your living space. And how does that affect you? So, yeah, look out for major changes in your home life and in your career life, and let me know how it goes. I'm so curious, and I hope that these changes are positive for you. I want to read from you from Chris Brennan's Hellenistic Astrology book, The Study of Fate and Free Will, about the 10th house. So, the 10th house is usually conceptualized as the highest or most visible place in the chart, and as a result, it comes to be associated with significations related to the native's reputation and rank, as well as advancement, change, and innovation in general. In the Hermes text, this was evidently extended to broader notions of honor, ruling, and leading. Generally, the 10th and its ruler are also associated with how effective or successful the native is. So the 10th house represents actions that you take, which is why it has such a strong link to your career. So you may notice major advancements in the areas of your career and innovations, and you're suddenly, if you were a little bit stuck before, you may become wildly unstuck in like the best way and making major leaps and changes and moving forward and establishing some level of authority and a position of power. Alternatively, you could have some people could be let go from their job, and that ends up affecting their home and family because of the stress of being let go of their job. And, do you need to downsize your budget? Do you need to change how things are? Some people may end up working from home for their career. So, what I'm trying to show you is the broadest conceptualization of all of these ideas, and then show you how they may interlink into your life because they're going to be different for everyone, especially depending on what planets you have in your fourth house and in your 10th house. But either way, I hope it goes so well for you. Leave a comment. Let me know how your fifth and 11th house eclipses have been. I want to hear your eclipse stories. I want to hear what's been up for you. And let me know what you hope to happen in your eclipses in the fourth and 10th house. Thank you so much. Hello, my beautiful Cancer and Capricorn risings. Welcome. Since April of 2023, you guys have had eclipses going through your fourth house of home and family and your 10th house of career and public standing. So, what I'm going to try to do today is give you the broadest overall interpretations of the archetype or the energy of these different areas of your life so you can see for yourself, have changes been taking place in these parts of your life for you? So, just to reiterate, eclipses signify major endings and major beginnings. So, having eclipses going through your fourth house of home, this could bring changes to your home, your living situation, your parents. The fourth house represents home, where you lay your head to rest every single night. It also represents home, as in your parents and your family of origin, your grandparents, and your lineage, like your ancestors. The fourth house is called the subterranean place. It is the foundation of our entire birth chart. So when we think about what is that foundation and apply it to your life, what is your foundation? Where do you come from? What country are you from? What city are you from? What is your place of origin in like location in the world, but also emotionally? Like, what ties do you have to your family? The fourth house is typically the house of the father. The fourth house is, if we were seeing an actual house, the fourth house would be the basement because the fourth house is called the subterranean place. It has a connection to land and to everything that's underground. So we can take a very literal connection with this to like land and basement and things that are happening underneath the surface. And we can also take more of a metaphorical lean on this. So this could be things that you're doing and moving in private, things that you're kind of keeping to yourself, things that are maybe will come into fruition, but for right now, they're kind of under wraps in this very private place. People with a lot of fourth house placements tend to be quite private. They tend to move very quietly, not telling people their plans. And the fourth house is associated with mystical matters and secrets. So, for that reason, it is associated with death. And a lot of people with fourth house eclipses, sometimes this will be when they die, or in fourth house perfection years, that's when they die, because it's almost like you're going back to the hidden place, like the place where you came from in a way. In Chris Brennan's Hellenistic astrology book, The Study of Fate and Free Will, he writes that the fourth house is commonly associated with old age, the end of life, death, funerals, and things after death. He also says that the notion of the fourth place being under the earth and opposite to the most public part of the chart often results in symbolic associations with things that are hidden or matters that are secret, as well as religious or mystical matters, treasures, or sometimes confinement. So, that is a very broad archetype of what the fourth house is. I have a friend who's currently having eclipses in her fourth and 10th house, and one thing that's really consumed her recently has been finding land. She's finding a home. She's been very obsessed with this idea of like finding this place where she wants to settle down and have roots. So she's throughout these since April of 2023, my friend has been actively looking at pieces of property. She's been looking at where she wants to settle. That's been something that's been a driving force for her the last few years is finding where is her home. She's actually looking at purchasing a property, so I will be interested if she ends up doing that in the next 6 months because she's found something that she's liked. So that can be something that could be happening for you right now. The fourth house can also, because it's associated with like hidden matters in our families and our places of origin and our ancestors, you may have been coming up with like dealing with things related to your lineage and your genealogy. So, people with eclipses in their fourth house, they may become obsessed with like linking their, finding their familial roots, like 23andMe, Ancestry.ca. They may have been going back and looking at where their family came from, where they came from, what made them who they are. This is also a place where I would associate, like, if you're dealing with some generational traumas and some things that you want to let go of and transform. I feel like the fourth house is where you confront a lot of those things because it has such a strong connection to your family. The fourth house specifically has a very strong connection to the father. So there could have been changes with your father, things happening in your father's life. So since April of 2023, the eclipses have been going between your fourth and your 10th house. Now, the 10th house is opposite to the fourth house in location in the chart and in every other way. The 10th house is your most public facing house. It is your career. It is the thing that you do, your success, your achievements. It is like the 10th house is like being on a stage. It is what everyone sees and recognizes you for. So, for this reason, the 10th house can include things like becoming a parent because you went from a single person to now a parent, and that changes your role in society. For that same reason, it can also represent marriage because you went from a single person to getting married, or from a married person to someone who's now divorced. It represents changes in how you're perceived publicly. In ancient astrology, the 10th house was associated with career and advancement, change, and innovation in general. The 10th house and its ruler are associated with how effective or successful the native ends up becoming. So, people with fourth and 10th house eclipses, you may have noticed things happening in parallel, like side by side, not related, or things very much happening interconnected between your fourth house of home and family and your 10th house of career. So, for this could be, for some people, it could have been like, you lost a job, and because you lost a job, you ended up having to move to a new apartment or you had to make changes within your family. Alternatively, you could have gotten a new job and gotten a new position of at work and received a level of career advancement and recognition. The 10th house is a very, very visible house, so it's almost like putting you on a stage. And because you received a promotion, you ended up being able to help out your family, give your parents some money, or move to a home that suits you. Another very, very literal manifestation of fourth and 10th house eclipses could be you decided to go into business as a real estate person and invest in real estate with your parents. So I'm trying to give you a few kind of broad examples of how this can manifest so that you can spot when this is happening in your life. You could have also gotten married, and because you gotten married, that changed your public reputation or the way that the world perceives you, and then you end up moving in with your partner or your spouse, sorry. You may have reached new heights in your career and gained new visibility. So people could have started following you. You could have had videos that went viral, or your book sold out, or it's reaching some level of a pinnacle moment of being perceived by the public. The 10th house also represents the parent that was our primary caregiver. So for a lot of people, this could be their mom. For other people, this might be their dad. It just depends on how your family's set up. There's no wrong, there's no right. So you could have had changes with both of your parents, the fourth house ruling father and the 10th house ruling mother. Um, you may have made changes to your relationship to them. They may have gotten married, they may have gotten divorced, they may have passed away, you may have, worked through some of your issues within your relationship. You may have grown closer. So it's any changes and new beginnings with your parents as well. So, to my Capricorn and Cancer risings, since September of 2024 until April of 2027, you guys are having eclipses between your third house of neighborhood and your ninth house of foreign travel. So, let's get into it. The third place is called the place of the goddess because the moon has her joy here. It is also the place of queens, and in ancient astrology, it was associated with like governments and ruling authorities within towns and cities. It is also the place associated with divination, astronomers. The third place in ancient astrology is associated with temples, worships, priests, and priestesses. It is the place of religious observance. And it is one of the delineations of the third house is like speaking to the gods and receiving messages from spirits and prophecies. So there's definitely some woo-woo associated with the third house. The third house is also very commonly and often associated with siblings and extended family. So when you have eclipses going through your third house, you may have your siblings may undergo some major life changes, or you may end up spending more time with your siblings for whatever reason. There's more of a focus on your siblings and your extended family during this time. The third house is also associated with short distance travel. So these days, short distance travel could be going to Miami for a few days or, jetting off to a different country. but it's short distance, not necessarily actually in the distance, but in the sense that you're not going to be there for very long. You're just making trips to go and see places to do things, and you're coming back. It's not a long journey. It's a quick little trip, sometimes within your neighborhood, sometimes within your province or state, wherever you're listening from, and other times just like a weekend trip away. So, whenever people have third house eclipses, they may end up traveling a lot more frequently, traveling with work, because the third house is associated with movement. That's why it's often associated with like these short trips. And the third house, with its association to movement, can have a very strong link to cars. Anything that gets you from one place to another, any mode of transportation. So that could be your bike, your vehicle, your e-bike, your dragon, whatever it is that you're using to get around. So maybe you buy a car in this time, maybe your car breaks down, maybe you end up getting into racing, like car racing. People who love engines and cars, and I think that goes vroom, they often have strong third house placements. The third house, with its association with movement, can also indicate our physical movement, walking, and our mobility and dancing, anything that kind of spending more time in movement. The third house often also represents our neighborhood. It's odd because I feel like in this day and age, we are very disconnected from our neighbors. And so it can be odd to say to someone that your neighbors may be becoming more important in your life or your neighborhood or your neighborhood community. But third house eclipses will often bring more of a focal point of interest into those areas of your life, whether that's your next door neighbor or join like neighborhood watch, something like that. Um, just whatever is getting you out and connecting you to your immediate community that surrounds you. The third house is also associated with education. So in modern astrology, that's definitely taken more of a early childhood education. So people with third house placements may end up being teachers in elementary schools, or it's anything like you're doing a course, you're doing some type of learning. The third house also rules, because it rules education and movement, it rules anything to do with communication. So, creating a podcast like I'm doing right now, or starting to write more, anything where you're like delivering a message to someone or something else, that is the third house. The ninth house is similar to the third house in that it has strong associations with religion and spirituality, and also with education and travel. So the ninth place in ancient astrology is called the place of God. So it is, if we think about where it is in our chart, it's at a higher point. It's something that you're kind of like reaching for, whereas the third house is more down at the base of your chart. The ninth house is associated with philosophy, higher learning. So for some people, this could be, post-secondary school, like going to university. People with third and ninth house eclipses will often start some type of education opportunity, going to school, or delving into a realm of philosophy or anything where you're learning more. It's associated with, the ninth house is associated with like organized religion and spirituality. So if someone had these eclipses, this is, when they would go into a parish and become a priest or a preacher or a nun, or they would go and seek a journey of like becoming a monk and experiencing that lifestyle. It's anything where you're connecting to that higher level of spirituality. The ninth house is also associated with astrology, so you may end up getting more into astrology during this time, more into anything that connects you to some level of a higher power. The ninth house is associated with travel, but it's different than how the third house is. The ninth house is associated with long-term overseas travel. Think like a voyage. The third house is associated with the travel where you can kind of get there and back between a couple days. It's just like a short little thing. The ninth house is like, I'm going on a journey and I am going to live in this country abroad for a whole year and I'm going to immerse myself in this culture and get to know this place and be a foreigner in a foreign land. And that's a whole different kind of experience because yes, that's a large physical journey, but that's also you're changing your worldview, how you perceive the world because you're in a different place and things are happening differently. And I think that's why it's also connected to like university because, or, religion, because it's anything that changes your concept of the world and your place in it. The ninth house is also associated with governments. So someone with a third and ninth house eclipses may end up getting a position of power within the government. So the third house would be like your government and your municipality, like being the mayor. And the ninth house would be like being the president because it's the higher form of that greater structure is the ninth house. The religious associations of the ninth house often also end up extending to things like astronomy and astrology and divination. The ninth house is the place of divination. So if you're a seer and you have a gift of being able to see or being a psychic or being any type of prophet or like orator, you'd probably have very prominent placements in the ninth house. I've had friends that have had eclipses going through across their third and ninth house, and they've ended up taking a lot of journeys. Like, for example, my one friend, she ended up having major things going on with her siblings, which is the third house. She ended up taking a lot of short-term trips to see her boyfriend because he lives an hour away from her. So this is third house. She also ended up going on a longer trip abroad to Peru and she was there for a few months and like experiencing a different culture, and that would be ninth house. I have another friend who's experiencing these same eclipses and they became much a greater like fixture within their community and they started doing the courses that they need to apply for university because they're going to go back to university. So, doing courses right now, that's like a third house thing. To go to a higher education program, that's a ninth house thing. So, I want you to think about all of those broad kind of symbols and concepts that I told you about and see where they show up in your life and what things are resonating with you. And you'll be able to see, once you be able to figure out what kind of resonates, you'll be able to see where those changes might take place for you coming up. So, Cancer and Capricorn risings, let me know if you've already seen these changes happening to your home and family with the fourth and 10th house eclipses, or if you already see some of the changes happening in your third and ninth house of your neighborhood, siblings, and your ninth house of overseas travel. So tell me, I want to hear about your experience. Leave a message, drop a comment, tell me about it. And good luck. Hello, my beautiful Leo and Aquarius risings. How are you? I hope you're doing great. So, since April of 2023, you've had eclipses going across your third and your ninth house. So let's get into it. What does this all mean? The third house is associated with neighbors, siblings, relatives, your neighborhood, mobility, movement, short distance travel, and communication and learning. So the third house represents anything to do with your siblings. So if you've had eclipses going through your third house, maybe you've spent more time with your siblings recently, maybe you've spent more time, maybe something major has happened in the lives of your siblings and you've somehow been brought into it. You may have had a heightened focus on your extended family and what's going on with them, or maybe you're working with an extended family member. You may also become more involved in your immediate community. It's kind of funny because I feel like in the current day and age, we don't really think about our neighbors as often as we did back in the past. And So when you have third house eclipses, though, your neighbors end up somehow coming to the forefront, whether that's like your next door neighbor and you're having an issue with them, or you've become friends with them, or yeah, your neighborhood community. Maybe you joined the neighborhood watch, maybe you started a neighborhood book club, like maybe you started to work with artists within your community. There's something about your immediate community and your immediate surroundings that you're becoming much more connected to. The third house also rules short distance travel. So we're talking like going to Miami for a few days, heading to the next town over for a few days, like taking short distance trips, spending more time in your car. The third house, because of its connection to travel and mobility, it has a really strong association with cars, vehicles, anything that goes vroom, anything that gets you from one place to the next. So I find people that have really strong third house placements, they often end up being obsessed with cars. That is just one thing I've noticed. Like if I meet guys and I'm like, look at their chart and I'm like, oh, they're like truck drivers and their son is in their third house, or they like love F1. The third house, with its connection to mobility, can also be connected to your own physical mobility. Maybe you end up starting to run or walk more. It just, the third house has a lot to do with like movement. So maybe you start to dance, maybe you join a neighborhood dance committee, like something like that. The third house is often called the place of the queen, and it is the place of divination and messages. So we could be talking very woo-woo here. We could say you had a dream and the dream came true, and that was a message from like the gods above, or whatever you subscribe to, really, whether it's God or spirit or anything. The Because the third house is associated with messages, it also has a lot to do with communication. So, writing, communicating, anything where you're able to deliver one message from one person to another. So, the third house could be like having a strong third house, could be people with strong third house placements can be writers. They might write articles, they might write books, they might have a podcast, they might be a radio host, anything that's getting a message out there and communicating it to someone else. The third house also has a strong connection to education. So during the third house eclipses, you may be desirous for learning. You're like, I want to learn everything about something. And you start a course, you start a class, and you learn all you can. The third house, with its connection to learning, has a lot of connections to like your early childhood learning. So, people that work in daycares, people that work in schools, people that are teachers, whether you're the teacher or you're going into these places and you're spending more time in these places. So, just to reiterate that eclipses signify major endings and major beginnings. So, I just gave you a very, very broad interpretation of everything that the third house encompasses. How it's going to manifest for you is totally dependent on you, your life, and your planets, and the other parts of the chart that are being affected by these eclipses. So I just want to tell you like the broadest example of everything so that you can kind of be able to track and think like, oh yeah, this is where this is aligning with me and this doesn't, but all these other things do. So the ninth house is called the place of God. It is associated with like religion and spirituality and philosophy. The ninth house is associated with anything where you're essentially seeking something that's far outside of you, whether that's going on a very long journey abroad and being a foreigner in a foreign land. The third house is associated with the kind of travel that you can do in a couple days, and it's, you're just kind of like vroom vroom going and coming back. The ninth house is associated with the kind of travel where you're going on a voyage. You're experiencing something, you're in search of something, you're going to go live in a foreign country for a year and you're going to immerse yourself in a different culture. And because you immerse yourself in a different culture, you were able to think about life totally differently. And you experience what it's like to be a foreigner in a strange land, and it's this entire like restructuring of life and the way that you see it. The ninth house is also associated with like philosophy and religion because you're seeking something from some kind of higher knowledge base, whether that's, a university that is like an institution of knowledge and you go there to receive higher learning, or whether that's, going to a temple and becoming a monk and seeking knowledge in that way, or, suddenly subscribing to a lot of different philosophies and learning about philosophy and learning about different people's views on life and the world. The ninth house is associated with government, so the third house would be associated with like being the mayor of your neighborhood because it's very localized. The ninth house would be associated with like being the king or being the prime minister or the president. It's people of authority and of power. So you may end up reaching a level of prominence or eminence in your whatever field you're in. You may end up getting more involved in politics within your community. You may end up, if you're like a politician, you may end up getting elected to be like governor or premier or whatever it is. People that have third and ninth house eclipses, they may start taking courses and then those courses like really pique their curiosity and then they decide they want to go back to school and they want to go to university and like study these things that they're learning. Someone with third and ninth house eclipses may end up taking a lot of short distance trips. Like I have a friend who's had these eclipses happening for her, and she's taking a lot of short distance trips to go see her boyfriend. And she's thinking about going back to school. She's like doing everything she can to apply to go to school. And then um, she actually ended up going down to Peru for a few months and like immersing herself in Peruvian culture and going on a long journey. I have another friend with these eclipses, and she's actually going back to school. And um, it'd be perfect if I knew someone that was going to be a monk because that's such a third and ninth house eclipse is like they got into Buddhism because there's a neighborhood Buddhism club. And then because of that, they end up going to like France or Asia to join a Buddhist monastery and experiencing that whole lifestyle. That would be perfect. So if you're a monk, let me know what your eclipses are if you just recently entered the monkhood, because I'd love to know. So, Leo and Aquarius, those are the major themes that have been happening for you since April of 2023. I want to know, have you noticed these things? Have these things been showing up for you? Please write in your comments below what's been happening for you. I'm so curious. So, since September of 2024 and until April of 2027, you are starting to have eclipses in your second house and your eighth house. So the second house is called the Gate of Hades. It is associated with our possessions, our finances, our money, the ways in which we make money, and our relationship to the material world. It is also in more modern astrology, it is associated with the ego, attachments, like egoic attachments. It is also associated with feelings of self-worth. So if you're having eclipses in your second house, you may be faced with your own conception of yourself. Are you confident? Are you not confident enough? Are you overly confident? Do you attach your ego too much to your possessions? How would you feel more secure in yourself? And in what way are you over identifying with the things that you own? The second house, because it has a lot to do with our livelihood and our finances, it can show, when we have eclipses in the second and the eighth, it can show changes in these areas. So you may have a sudden windfall of money. You may end up owing someone a lot of money and having to, spend a lot more. The second house is very much associated because it's associated with how we make our money. It can be very much associated with people who are entrepreneurs and have their own businesses. So if you're having second and eighth house eclipses, you may end up starting your own business. You may end up starting a side hustle that ends up becoming something much more. The eighth house is called the idle place. It is the place where things are inactive and you're not necessarily doing anything, rather, things may be happening to you. So, the eighth house is the house of death. Having eclipses going across your second and eighth house, someone may die. That's not always the case, so do not worry. It is also representative of the benefits from death in terms of like inheritances, inheriting land or money, or even emotional inheritances that you receive from your parents and from your grandparents. The eighth house is associated with other people's money. So this could be your partner's money, your partner's finances, money just being given to you, a sugar daddy, a sugar mommy, if you will. Having eclipses going across your second and your eighth house, there's a really strong financial link here. There's a really strong link to your finances. The second house is what you do to make money. The eighth house is like things that are outside of your control that end up impacting your financial situation. The eighth house is also the place of debt. So, a great example of this would be that you'd want to buy a house. So, to buy a house, you have to get a mortgage. So, you go into debt to acquire your house. On a more psychological level, because the eighth house represents inheritances, it can show the things that we have to let go of that we've inherited from our families, like outdated belief systems and attachments that no longer serve us. The eighth house is associated with sex, but it's very different than how the fifth house is associated with sex. The fifth house is associated with sex for creativity and like fun and like producing a child, and it's more like dating. The eighth house is associated with sex in the same way that it's associated with death. You know, they say the French call the orgasm le petit mort. It's like the little death. It's a place where you go and you have this profound intimacy with someone else, whether that intimacy is like sharing finances, sharing your most profound vulnerabilities and weaknesses, and exposing yourself to another person, or having the type of soul shaking, earth shattering kind of sex where you're really joining with someone else. So, eclipses across the second and eighth house can have you questioning your self-worth, your what you do to make money, your like you may be pursuing a side hustle, you may be working really hard on a freelance job. It also then the eighth house comes in and says, "Oh, but I'll just give you some money because your grandfather died and here's $30,000 from his inheritance." Or, um, or it could be like your partner's money. So your partner ends up getting a bonus and then you end up like doing well financially because of that. So there's a lot of feelings of there's a strong thread of finances, but also a greater thread of the ego and attachments. And those are the common themes that run between the second and the eighth house. So, Leo and Aquarius, have you seen these themes? Are you noticing them coming up for you? I want to know. Please tell me. Let me know what your experience is like. Leave a comment and let me know if you're already experiencing these things already happening for you. We did have the first eclipse in September, and we did just have a Virgo lunar eclipse just a few weeks ago. So you may be noticing these themes already, and yeah, just let me know. I'm so curious. So leave a comment. And thank you. Hello, my beautiful Pisces and Virgo risings. Since April of 2023, you've had eclipses going between your second house of finances and self-worth and your eighth house of death and inheritances. So we have the last eclipse in Aries in March on the 29th, and we'll be feeling those effects until September of 2025. So let's get into it. I'm going to try to explain the broadest archetype, the broadest symbols and themes of these parts of your life so that you'll be able to spot have changes been taking place in these lives, and if so, what are they? So then you'll be able to spot your greater eclipse story. So to start, remember that eclipses signify major endings and major beginnings. So the second house is called the Gate of Hades. It is connected to the underworld. It is the place that comes after the first house of self and connects us to the material world that surrounds us. So, for that reason, it asks us, what is our connection to our finances and to our material possessions? How do we get those material possessions and how do we obtain money? How do we make money? How do we spend money? How do we save money? It's a lot of money, money, money. And because of that, or maybe kind of in conjunction with that, the second house has a lot to do with feelings of self-worth. When you have transits going through your second house or eclipses, you may be called to reevaluate your own ego and your ego's attachments to external needs for validation. It's very, the modern astrology, the second house is very much connected to the ego. And because of that, I feel like it's really connected to our feelings of confidence. So maybe you've been really not confident, and throughout this eclipse journey, you've learned how to have more faith in yourself and to your power back. Or maybe you were overly confident and you overly identified with your material possessions and you thought that made you some type of person. And then through these eclipses, you found that, wait, once you have those things taken away, those things actually don't make up who you are. And those material possessions or that money that you have doesn't deserve to have such a strong impact on your feelings of self-worth and self-confidence. So there's an external factor here of like money and possessions, but there is an internal of like self-worth and feelings of confidence and ego. People with strong second house placements, they often tend to end up being entrepreneurs. They end up having a side hustle. So maybe through these eclipses happening in your second and eighth house, maybe you developed a side hustle. Maybe you've found alternate ways to make money, or maybe you've had a greater inflow of money, or money's been a greater level of interest for you, or you've had to spend more, you've had to give away more. So there's a lot to do with money here. And this is happening in parallel with the eclipses happening in your eighth house. So the eighth house is called the place of death. It is people who have eclipses in their eighth house, they may experience a death in the family or the death of a friend, and don't get scared because that's not always the case. Okay, so please don't worry. It could also be, instead of a literal death, like a metaphorical death, the death of a relationship. I find the eighth house more in modern astrology. To me, it has a very strong connection to our attachments and to things that we've learned maybe from our families that we need to let go of. The eighth house represents those hidden dark parts of you. So maybe there's a thought process that's like outdated and that you need to let go of. Maybe there's a behavior pattern or something that was taught to you from your family and your grandparents and some level of like generational trauma that you need to release and let go of and move through. The eighth house, because of its association with death, it's associated with sex, and it's not the fun, light, carefree, like, let's just have a baby sex. I'm not saying that's fun, light, carefree having a baby. But it's not like the early like dating, like sexuality and flirting of like the fifth house. The eighth house is like what the French would call like le petit mort, which is like the little death that you experience like when you orgasm. So it's this stripping away and this like intense, profound, sexual union where you're exposing yourself to someone else. And that can be amazing and terrifying. And that can be an experience that we have with someone else, or it can be an experience that we have just on our own. And I mean this in so many levels, whether that's like you kind of experiencing your own death of an old way of self, or letting go of a relationship or a person, or, laying something to rest finally. The eighth house is called the idle place. So if the second house is where we're going out, we're making our money and we're getting that bag and we're like doing that thing, right? The eighth house would be all the inactive ways that we make money. The eighth house would be like someone died and you received an inheritance, and that inheritance was sizable, and now you're able to invest into your company. Or your partner ends up doing really well financially and you end up benefiting from that. The eighth house is anything to do with other people's money. So people with prominent eighth house placements, they tend to work in, like the stock market or in banks. They work with other people's money. The eighth house also represents debt. So having second and eighth house eclipses, one example of something that could happen would be you end up buying a house with your partner, and your partner puts the down payment down because you're benefiting from your partner's money. And now you're, in debt to this bank because now you own a house. Or eclipses in this area could be that you've been spending a lot of money from your second house with the second house connection, and your business ends up taking off, and at the same time your partner's business ends up taking off, and you both benefit financially from that relationship with each other. Those are the broadest themes of the second and the eighth house. So my question to you now is, have you seen these themes playing out for you since April of 2023? And do you feel like those themes are still continuing until September of 2024? And just, I want you to pay attention to all the things that I said and see what resonates with you, what doesn't, how some of those very broad concepts that I brought up actually pinpoint down into your life. So, Virgo and Pisces, you guys are experiencing something pretty incredible and very profound, because as these eclipses have been wrapping up in your second and eighth house, we've started to get in September of 2024, we started to get eclipses in Pisces and Virgo. So for you, that's your first house of self and your seventh house of marriage and union. So whenever eclipses hit cadent houses are first, fourth, seventh, and 10th, they end up bringing quite a shake up, and they end up being felt quite prominently, because the first house is the house of self, the fourth house is the house of home, the seventh house is the house of marriage, and the 10th house is the house of career. These are all cornerstones of our lives. So the first house in ancient astrology is called the helm. It is the life breath. It is the identity. It is who you are. It is the person that is steering the ship. So when you have eclipses moving through your first house, you may have a total restructuring of your identity. Who are you? How do you come across to the outside world? How do you place yourself within the world? And what is your overall life path and life direction? The reason why the ascendant or the rising sign in astrology is called the helm is they're actually referring to the helm of the ship, the the place where the ship is steered, the ship being your life. In ancient astrology, the first house is the only house that represents you in your life, or in your chart. Everything else represents everyone else and all other parts of your life, but the first house is you. So these next couple years could be a profound change for you. You could be reorienting yourself onto a completely new life direction. The first house is connected to the physical constitution and your body. So, getting plastic surgery would be something that would happen in like a first house eclipse. You're making a profound change to your physical body. I would say getting haircuts, getting body mods, anything to change your physicality, you're changing up your personal style, anything that changes who you are. The seventh house is the house of the other, and it's directly opposite to the first house. So the first house is who you are in life, and your overall direction in life. Your seventh house is your marriage partner, your significant relationships. So I would say seventh house relationships, they say that seventh house relationships are the partner that you live with, like the marriage partner that you move in with, or the significant other that it's like you're not just dating, you're like together, living together, and you're moving in life together. I would also say seventh house relationships are your best friends, those one-on-one relationships where you're so close and there's so much there between you and you've moved through so much of life together. The seventh house really governs any of those like one-on-one connections. So people with a lot of seventh house placements end up being therapists where they're taking private clients and they're having those one-on-one conversations with them. So having eclipses across your first and seventh house, this could represent so many things. Again, eclipses being major endings, major beginnings. This could be that your partner, your life partner, ends up going through a total change, and that affects your relationship. And you have to kind of figure out who you are in this relationship now. I was listening to some people talk about their experiences with first and seventh house eclipses, and one person said that they came out as non-binary, and so they had to figure out all over again like who they were in the world, and they were also at the same time living alone without their partner for the first time in a long time. And so it was like they had to reconnect to their own sense of identity and figure out who they were. And then because of that, they ended up having a restructuring of their relationship because like once a change happens to one person, the change has to happen in the partnership. Otherwise, the partnership kind of falls behind. So changes in your partnership. So this could lead to having eclipses across your first and seventh house could lead to a breakup of a marriage, a dissolution of a marriage. It could also lead to someone getting married. My brother is having these eclipses right now. He's an Aries rising, so he's at the tail end of this experience for him. And at the beginning, he met his partner, got engaged to her, and is actually getting married in the next like month or two. So that's a very, very literal manifestation of first and seventh house eclipses. So it's about your identity and your relationship to other people. So whether that's becoming single or, you know, I think by extension, this could also have a lot to do with your attachments and how you attach to other people. You may kind of end up going through a major healing process, and through that, it changes your view of the world, and you change, and then therefore your relationships change. So, the first house, especially because it's the helm of your life, having eclipses here, you could go into a totally new life direction. You could have started out this eclipse series doing one thing and then you end doing something totally different. So, Pisces and Virgo, I'm so curious. I want to know, have you already started seeing these changes happening for you? And if so, please tell me about it. I'm so curious. I can't wait to hear. And I hope that this resonates for you. So, thank you. Good luck. Let me know. Thank you everyone for listening. This was a different episode for me, and I really hope you like it. If you do like it, please leave a comment and let me know if you'd like to see more episodes like this in the future. When giving generalized predictions, It is interesting because I have to describe the broadest concepts of the houses and the places. Because one thing I've learned from reading so many people's different charts and hearing about their lives is that no one's life is the same, especially like I'm giving such a general view here. No one's life is the same. Everyone's life is so different, but it's so crazy how when I describe things in the broadest possible sense of like what the different houses mean, how much it actually rings true in often a very, very literal way. So if these have resonated with you, please let me know. If you would like to know more about what's coming up for you, please book a reading with me. You can reach me at www.rileyadair.com. You can find me on Instagram at RileyAdair111, TikTok on AstroRye94, or email me at info@rileyadair.com. And thank you so much, everyone. Happy eclipse season and good luck. May the changes in your life be positive and for the best. And I just hope you find your happiness and your peace in whatever way that comes to you.